right, it's 11:30. We still have some folks trickling in, but want to get started and honor everyone's time. Thank you for joining us for the second session of the live sync workshops. If you haven't already, I put the link for the Canvas course in the chat there. All these sessions will be recorded and the slides will be shared in the Canvas course tomorrow. The recording and slides from our session 1 on Tuesday are posted there now. So if you are unable to attend that, you can go find that information there. That course also offers a lot more information. These 4 live sessions don't encompass everything, so make sure you check into that space as well. So I have the pleasure to introduce from the Herberger Institute for Design Technology, Tim McKean. He is one of their fantastic instructional designers, and I will pass the mic over to him.
Thank you so much. I'm Tim McKean from Herberger Institute, an instructional designer there. And so today we're going to talk about Sync classroom management. And the reason that I've been selected for giving this presentation is that before I was an instructional designer, I was in the classroom for 15 years in the middle school and high school classroom, and then also teaching adjunct at a local university in their evening program for their master's program for teachers that were learning to integrate technology, just as you all are. So I have a lot of experience teaching this kind of material, but also very specific experience doing a Sync classroom as well. In about 2008, when the recession hit in Southern California, all over, we were having trouble getting students in our program, and we found that if we offered our program was at a central location, but we had a lot of satellite locations, and so we realized if we kind of gathered all the students that needed a certain course, that we could have enough to offer the course. So we would have some at one location, and then other students join virtually from their locations in order to get students the courses that they needed. And we called that virtually face-to-face, and we started doing that again around 2008 and moved to that virtual face-to-face model. So for about 10 years, I taught in that model of where I would have some students in the classroom with me. We would try to offer the course at the location that had the most students, and then always with a handful of students that were virtual, joining in real time, just as we are with Sync, but from different locations. So I'm coming to you with some real world experience. Hopefully that helps this not just to be a theoretical conversation, but these are tools that worked for me as well. Now today I'm gonna like for you to engage with me a couple different ways. One will be with the Zoom chat. Right now we're using the Zoom chat to distribute links. There will be times where I turn it on when I want information back from you. So if I say, hey, what kind of ideas do you have around this topic? And I'll open up the Zoom chat and you can put your thoughts in there. This is a good strategy for you to consider in your class. When you are a host of a Zoom meeting, you'll have a little shield in your toolbar. And in that shield, you can turn the chat on and off. So that's something I recommend that you practice with, and something that I recommend you do. If you don't want the chat just to be an ongoing stream for the entire time of your class, turn it off when you want people to really pay attention to the primary presenter or the content being delivered, and then turn it on when you want them to give you some feedback. So that's one way to engage in a Sync session. Another tool that we're going to be demonstrating today is a Q&A tool that's part of my Google Slides. Right now we're sharing the Google Slides, and Google Slides has something called Audience Tools, and so I will go ahead and turn that on right now. And so now you have a link there, and I will put that link into the chat as well so that you can just copy and paste that link. And so that's a Q&A tool that you can use to ask questions. Now, one of the really important things about this Q&A tool is that don't use it just for comments, and do use it for questions. Try to keep your questions around the area of Sync classroom management, the tools and the techniques that we can use in the classroom. We're not here today to talk about the policy decisions that ASU leadership is making. We're not any part of that conversation. And so asking questions about, do students have to do this? Do faculty have to do this? That's not useful for us at this point, and we're not the people to really be answering those questions. So our goal today is to give you some tools and techniques to help your experience be better in the classroom and for your students to have a better experience as well. So, okay, you need to be logged in to the you need to be logged in with your ASU email address to access the Q&A tool. So if you get a notification that says you can't, that's why. Go ahead and log in with your ASU email address. Another cool feature of the Q&A tool is that you can vote things up or down. So if you have a question, go to the tool, and before you ask your question, look to see if your question's already been asked. And that way, I'm going to try to go quickly through my material, and when we get to the end, there's probably going to be several questions there, and we'll start with the questions that have been upvoted. So look to see if your question is there, upvote it. Even if you don't have a question, browse through the list and upvote the ones that you'd like me to answer first. And this is a great way to prioritize the issues that the majority of the participants feel need to be addressed. So another good tool that you can bring to your own class. And then the third way that you can interact today is by raising your Zoom hand. If you click on the participants tool in your Zoom toolbar, you can see an option there for you to raise your hand. Let's go ahead and practice that now. Everybody go ahead and raise your hand. Your Zoom hand, Alma. So click on your virtual hand. So this is another way for you to get some feedback from your students. So you might say, hey, everybody that, the thing that you might do in the classroom with the thumbs up and thumbs down, just to get some feedback, how many people have heard of this idea, or how many, raise your hand if you need more time, all those kind of things that you would do in a classroom with a hand raised is kind of better done in Zoom with the virtual hand. The other thing that's cool about the virtual hand, and as I explain this, if you could go ahead now and lower your hands, that'd be great, is that in the participants panel, when someone raises their hand, it bubbles them up to the top. So right now, we're excited to welcome 220 people into this session, but I can't have 220 people on my grid and see when people raise their hand, or be scrolling through that list to see if someone has their hand raised. So luckily in Zoom, when someone raises their virtual hand, their Zoom hand, it bubbles them up to the top. So as long as you're kind of monitoring that list and seeing who's up at the top, then you should be good to go. Go ahead, and those of you that have practiced raising your hands, go ahead and click the same button to put them back down. That'd be great. So around that same time that my school was exploring virtual face-to-face, Brian Beatty at San Francisco State was exploring the same idea. And he called his exploration HyFlex, to be a blending of the word hybrid flexible modalities. It focused on this idea of in-person in the classroom, synchronous online with, not Zoom at the time, but with some kind of video conferencing platform, and asynchronous online. And if you want to learn more about Brian Beatty and his work, he's got a free ebook that's available at that link, edtechbooks.org/HyFlex. Let me put that into the chat there so you can grab that. That's a free ebook, so check it out if you want to learn more about HyFlex. HyFlex and Sync are very similar, different names, slightly different approaches, but it's all very much the same idea of giving your learners choice and designing in flexibility and options in your course design. And that's going to be incredibly valuable for us going into the fall. As you know, information in Arizona is changing day to day. Information at ASU is changing from day to day. So the best thing that we can do in planning for fall is not to plan for any one specific outcome, but to plan for flexibility. And that's going to serve us best and serve our students best as well. Another thing I wanted to show here is with these schools, you can see Ohio State, University of Denver, colleges probably that you've heard of before. San Francisco State is there as well. These are all schools that have formally implemented HyFlex course design into some of their programs. So what we're doing here isn't necessarily groundbreaking. I think we're probably one of the first schools to do it at such a scale, but it's nice to know that the techniques that we're trying to employ here are not untested. They have stood the test of time. They are successful at these other schools. And so it's nice to know that we're not dangerously exploring new grounds, but rather pushing something that we know to work. So today I'm going to focus on 3 things to make your experience in the fall, your Sync classroom experience for you and your students, a smoother experience, a better experience overall. The first is to use live strategically. Think from a remote first approach, both when you're designing your course and in the delivery that you do in the classroom, and then use your team. Know that you're not alone, that you're not on your own to figure this out, but everybody is here to figure this out together. And there is a lot between UTO, between your different your units, and even within your departments, your peer groups. There's a lot that can be done together to make this experience better. So first, we're going to talk about using live strategically, and specifically this idea of the flipped classroom. Go ahead and raise your Zoom hand if you have heard of the flipped classroom before. Oh, that's good to see some hands going up. This is one of the techniques that I think changed my teaching the most. When I was first starting to learn some of these virtual techniques, how to scale myself when I was teaching in the middle school, and we were a weird school where we had A days and B days, and so I taught 16 sections of the same thing. Starting to flip that classroom, essentially clone myself with some video recordings, really saved me from giving the same instructions and same lessons 16 times over and over. But especially with my graduate students and my university classes, the flipped classroom is the #1 thing that changed my teaching and made me more efficient. So let's learn a little bit about flipped classroom from the originators.
The staffers at Woodland Park High School are getting attention worldwide for not giving out homework. Instead, the students watch recorded lectures at home and then do the corresponding homework during their regular class time. 11 News reporter Rosie Barisi is live tonight at Woodland Park. And Rosie, how do the students like it?
Well, Don, they love it, according to teachers and educators from as far as Japan have been calling the school asking where they came up with this brilliant idea. 2 teachers at the school say they stumbled on it on accident.
Those are mole-to-mole ratios.
The only homework these Woodland Park High School students ever really get is to watch TV.
Kids learn with a screen. I'm an old guy. You know, I like a book. I read a book this weekend. It was like with paper, you know, but these kids, they read with things like, you know, they look at screens.
Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams decided it would be a good idea to record their lectures live.
We discovered this software.
It was intended for students who couldn't make it to class.
Wow, this is an amazing teaching tool.
And that's when their wheels started turning.
What if we did that all the time?
And now they do.
Instead of sitting and wasting 45 minutes listening to a teacher yap, they're going to have more time to work one-on-one with the teacher, work through problems, do a lot more hands-on activities, a lot more lab activities.
Allowing students to do the brunt of their work in class has worked wonders for their students.
They used to go home and they would get stuck, they would call their friend, which is okay, they would cheat, or they would just give up on it.
Student scores have shot up this year, leading teachers to believe this is the way of the future.
It's going to happen. I think it's a matter of time. This is going to take off.
Kids can watch lectures on their iPods, cell phones, and the internet, but since not all kids have access to all those things, teachers can burn their lectures onto DVD, and so far they say that's worked for all the students at the high school. Don?
And we didn't even have DVDs when I was in high school. Rosie, thanks very much.
So one of the things I want you to notice on that one is that's a video from 2007. So again, this is not a new technique that we're talking about. And from, like you said, we saw all the hands going up. There's a lot of us that have explored this idea of flipped classroom. And I think one of the things that's going to give us a lot of flexibility and to take pressure off the live sessions, off the synchronous sessions in fall, is to do as much as we can flipped, to do as much as you can asynchronously, so that when you do have access to your students, whether it's in person or whether it's in Zoom, that you can do something that's really valuable, that you can have the best experience there. And I think if you try out this technique, and I put a link in the chat there to learn more about, it's just a YouTube search, but there's hundreds of videos on Flipped Classroom on YouTube if you want to learn more. There is also a book, so if you'd like to check out John and Aaron's book, that's there as well. I put that in the chat. So I'd encourage you to look into this idea of flipping your classroom, this idea of making the direct instruction portion asynchronous, putting as much into Canvas as you can, so that when you do meet with your students, that you're using that time really, really valuably. So I want you to think about this question. What can your students do with you that they can't do without you? And I'm going to send you out into breakout rooms here for just a few minutes, like 4 minutes, to think about this question. And then when you come back, you're going to have the chat available. So go ahead and put your response into the chat. Just one response from each breakout room will be fine. But along these lines of really thinking strategically about your synchronous time, really analyze and say, what do I need to be there for? What can my students only do when I'm there? So I'm going to send you out into breakout rooms now to think about that question. When you come back, put your answer in the chat. Available to you now, your ideas there. I like that idea of getting immediate feedback. Doing their assignments with instructor help echoes back to what Aaron was talking about. If students are getting stuck on homework at home, what can they do? If they're doing work in class, they've got a support system right there. Applying ideas, small group work, these are all excellent ideas. Muddiest points are fun. Yeah, so you guys are doing a really good job of thinking about strategically about what's valuable in that synchronous time, what's valuable in class time, that you could save time if you were able to distribute that direct instruction piece to asynchronously. And it's going to, all the flexibility and all the benefit that you gain from being able to do that, your students gain from being able to do that as well. If you'd like to learn more about, we're not going to watch this video today, but if you'd like to learn more about streaming video and just some of the techniques for thinking about, where did my chat room go? Oh, I just moved it. Thinking about cameras and lighting and just how you appear on video, there's a great interview here on the Stallman podcast with Alex Lindsay. Alex Lindsay is one of the nation's experts in live events and live video streaming. So check that out. I will drop a link to that in the chat, so you could watch that on your own time. Remember to go to the Q&A tool from time to time and upvote questions that you want me to get to. So the next strategy is to have a remote first approach. And what I mean by that is kind of, as I have the graphic here of the people standing at a fence, which is an image we often see in correlation with universal design for learning and with special needs accommodations, this idea that in order to give equity, we don't give everyone the same experience. We give people what they need so they have an equal experience, or so they have an equitable experience. And so when I'm talking about a remote first approach, that's because remote is harder. Students are not staying home because they're lazy or because they just don't want to come to class most of the time. it's much easier to come to class and just be involved than it is to be on Zoom, as you've all experienced this summer and this spring. I mean, how many of you right now, by raising your Zoom hands, would much rather have come to campus and been able to go to this workshop in person? Okay, a lot of people, and maybe there are several of you that would prefer the remote option. And that's why Sync is important, because there are people that prefer different things. There are people that learn in different ways and have different levels of comfort with this kind of platform. So keeping a remote first approach means thinking first about those people that are in the most difficult situation, which is those remote people, especially if they're at home because of difficult situations, whether that's a travel restriction or whether that's because they're sick themselves or a family member is sick. There are lots of reasons why your students are participating from home instead of coming to campus. And so trying to level that playing field by thinking about that remote experience first. All of the techniques that I teach for remote first approach will also be good for the in-person students or be neutral for them. So I'm never advocating to lower the bar for your in-person students, but rather to focus on those that remote experience first, because things that are good for your remote students will be good for everybody. So I've got 10. I'm going to try to get through them in 10 minutes so we can get to some Q&A. So the first is to know your mic and know how it works. Most of the rooms, or I shouldn't say most, some rooms will have these little golf ball mics hanging from the ceiling. And so if you're in a room that has that, you'll need to know kind of where they're hanging. They do a pretty good job in rooms that I've been in that have this kind of system of picking up sound from throughout the room, but it helps to know where they are. And if there's a place that sounds best for you to stand, then that's helpful to know. If you're in a room that has a lavalier mic where it's going to clip onto your shirt, then it's good to know how to turn it on, where to clip it. You don't want to get too close to your voice because you're going to overload it. You don't want to get too far away. You don't want it to be rubbing on your clothes if you're moving around. So practice when you get access to your equipment. I would do a practice run. Practice putting it on your shirt. What if your shirt doesn't have, like today, I'm wearing a t-shirt that doesn't have any kind of buttonholes or anything like that. So what would I do then? Things like that. One of the things I'm going to keep coming back to today is this idea of practicing. As much as you can, practice the things that you're going to need to do in class. Don't wait till the first day of class. Be aware of your camera framing. Framing means how you appear in the square frame of the camera. If your camera's in the back of the room, this is what you're going to look like. I don't know how the classrooms are set up, but it's going to be important for you to know where you can go and still be in frame, and where you shouldn't go if you don't want to go out of frame. And if you have any choice, I would recommend getting closer. Get a frame that is, as you can see in our examples here, the closer we get, the more expression you can see in the face, the more hand gestures and body language come across clearly. And I really like this in filmmaking. It's called a medium shot, kind of waist up kind of shot. I think there's not a whole lot of body language in your feet. There's a little bit kind of in your stance and things like that, but we can see that here. So I think I like this shot because it gets you a nice, you can see the hand gestures, you can see the face. So if you have the ability to get close to your camera so that you can, or move your camera, some rooms might have a camera that's movable and positionable where you want it. Then just be thinking about that and be aware of where that is. I really like this look. I don't know if we have any rooms that are big enough, but this look of with the screen in the background is kind of cool too. Take a lesson from theater and feel free to mark your spots. If there's a certain spot that sounds better because of where the microphone is placed, or if there's a certain spot you like to stand because of where you're framed in the shot, or maybe taping off a square of don't leave your square, because if you do, you're going to go out of your frame. Those are all good things to know and things to practice as well. When I was teaching remotely with Sync like that, I had about a 6x8 square taped out in my classroom where I knew that as long as I stayed in there, so even if if you're a walker, you feel the need to pace a little bit, as long as I stayed in that, I was still in the camera shot. And then I had an area on my whiteboard that my camera shot kind of covered a corner of my whiteboard. And so I knew where I could write if I wanted that whiteboard to be in my shot as well. So those are some things to be aware of. Number 3, eye contact and looking at your camera. This is a huge thing, as you've probably noticed, anytime if you spent time in Zoom meetings. And you can think about all those times of family photos trying to get little kids to look at the camera. I was chuckled when I found this image of a movie, a device to put a video above the camera so that kids would look. But know where your camera is. Look at it, you know, as you're scanning your classroom and making eye contact with your students. Look at the camera from time to time. If you need to get a figurine, a doll, a sign, anything, and place it on your camera to kind of remind you to look there, then that's a good idea. I use these little reinforcement dots. I don't have any that I can show you right now. But if your camera is hidden by Apple, you know, they like to put a dark hole in a dark frame so that you can't really see the camera. Then I take these reinforcement stickers and I put them on my screen. I've got one on each built-in camera here, so I know exactly where to look. And so even across the room, I know that I can be looking right at the camera. So that's another strategy too, is know where your camera is and make sure you're looking at it from time to time. This is one of kind of a newer strategy I've been playing with lately. In Zoom calls, we want to make eye contact with the people we're talking to because that's kind of respectful and it's personal, and there's a lot of unspoken language that comes in our eye contact, right? The saying goes that the eyes are the window to the soul. But at the same time, when I'm listening to someone, I want to see their face so that I can get all that nonverbal communication back. I just don't want to be staring at my camera while I'm listening. So I've kind of been playing with this idea of a listening versus talking two-part strategy of when you're listening to someone, go ahead and look at their image so that you're getting all that nonverbal communication. And when you're talking to them, address the camera. And I think that's working out pretty well so far. Manage your interactions with procedures and routines just like you would in the classroom. You'll find that classroom procedures and classroom things that you did and that worked and that were engaging in the physical classroom will still work and be engaging in the remote classroom. So have routines of how you want remote students to engage. For example, today I gave you 3 different ways to engage: with your Q&A tool, and with the Zoom chat, and by raising hands. If you want people to turn on their microphones and speak up, if you want people to post something in Canvas, if you're using a Google Doc to collect ideas, all those are great ideas. Just have them in place and tell students how you want them to engage. Don't just feel like it has to be a free-for-all. I've talked to people that are really concerned about the Zoom chat. And if you're concerned about that and you don't want that, you know, kind of free-flowing conversation going in the background, just turn it off. Tell them how you want them to engage. Responding to students equitably is going to be important. And it's going to be very easy for you to remember that the physical students are there and possibly forget that virtual students are there. So if you spent time in the elementary classroom, you've probably learned some routines having to do with popsicle sticks and student names, where you can just draw a stick and call on a student, and that kind of makes it random. Another idea here might be something that you have in your hand that reminds you to call on a virtual student if it's in your right hand, or a physical student if it's in your left hand, and just pass it back and forth as you respond to students. There are lots of ways you can do that. Just be conscious about it, and make something and choose a routine that works for your population. I won't necessarily say go back and forth. If you've got more students in your room than you have virtually, then that wouldn't be equitable, right? If you've got more students virtually, then again, so just have a routine and think about the way that you're addressing students and responding to student questions. The idea of right away is one that came over a couple of years of doing this, and is based on the idea that virtual students have a much harder time reading the room and knowing when it's appropriate to ask a question or when someone else is about to talk. When you're in class, you can kind of see the gears churning if someone's about to ask a question, virtual students can't. So in my classroom, virtual students have the right of way. So that means if a virtual student, a remote student, and a physical student start talking at the same time and kind of overlapping each other, then the virtual student gets to keep going and the physical student needs to wait. And also because it's much easier for me to see who that physical student was and come back to them. Where if I went with the physical student and then tried to go back to my remote student, I don't have quite the idea of who that was that started saying something. So it's harder to go back to them. And it's also, as you know, you've done some of these things here. It's awkward to talk on microphone when you can't really see who you're talking to very well or know if it's appropriate to talk. It takes a little more guts. It takes a little bit more of a jump to do that. So in my classroom, I give my remote students the right of way. Physical students know that I will come back to them. I don't ever, disregard them. But just again, because it's harder to be remote. Using digital assets whenever possible rather than physical assets. That means doing something like a virtual whiteboard on your tablet. As you can see in the examples here, you can imagine having something show up right on your screen rather than trying to see the board in the video is going to be a very different experience. And you might actually find that your physical students benefit from this as well because they can see it, at this kind of distance rather than looking across the room trying to read what you're writing on the board as well. So that means doing something like a virtual whiteboard or maybe slides or video on demand like we did with the news segment earlier. Some of the rooms will have this item that you see in the upper left-hand corner, the 24-inch touchscreen Dell monitor. Those are really cool. I've worked with those before. If you don't have that, then using something like a tablet or the little pen tablet, the Wacom pen tablets is something that's a USB device that you can just bring on your own. That way you have your own that you're familiar with. And Zoom has a whiteboarding feature built right in. So when you go to screen share, there's a whiteboard option there. So you can just write right on your screen and all your students that are participating in the Zoom call will be able to see that right on their screens. So that's another option to use those virtual or digital assets. The other benefit is they get captured on the recording a lot cleaner as well. The last few here will make a lot of sense and be very simple. Allow more time. Again, there's lag in internet. It's harder to read the room and know when it's appropriate to ask a question. So if you are asking a question or you are expecting students to respond to you, just give a little more time. Repeat questions the students ask. This is going to be beneficial both ways. If a student in your classroom asks a question, depending on how your room is mic'd, the remote students may not be able to hear that question. So if you just launch into the response, then they're going to have information, but without the context of the question. So repeating the question for the recording and repeating the question for the remote students is going to be beneficial. And then the same could be true the other way around. If a remote student asks a question, depending on how your speakers are set up in the room, it might be beneficial to repeat it for the physical students or also just for the recording, so that because you're going to be mic'd well, who knows how your student is mic'd. So hopefully it was good enough that you could hear it, but if you can repeat it for the recording, then that's going to be beneficial to everybody. And the last of the 10 tips is to log your attendance with a student action, and preferably a digital action. That could be something like a quiz question or posting on a discussion board or submitting an assignment. And that way you have a marker in place of who was present in the class experience. And this will be important for you. I'm not a big fan of grading on attendance in college, but this will be important in sync because you need to know who needs to do that alternate asynchronous thing. So if you're asking, if you have an activity that you're doing in class, a discussion or something like that, well, people that weren't able to join the class in real time, they're going to need to participate in that activity asynchronously, whether that's submitting a reflection on their own after watching the video or responding in a discussion board. So you're going to need to know who needs to do that asynchronous thing because who wasn't there. And I would encourage, again, I think it's better for you to use something that's digital because like a quiz or a discussion, something they do in Canvas, even for those physical students on their phone or if they have a laptop that they can bring to class, even if it's just a one question quiz that was did you come today, and it's only open during the period of, or maybe a more substantive question about the content, or a discussion board where they ask a question, what was one question that you had during today's lecture? All of those can bring value, but also more importantly, kind of just mark that attendance. So those were my 10 remote first tips. Let's go to the Q&A and see what we got there. Again, go visit that tool. I can put the link back in the chat again if anybody missed it. It doesn't feel like copying off the screen because that's annoying. So the first question is, how do I create this for our own classes? And I'm assuming you're talking about the Q&A tool. The Q&A tool is just part of Google Slides. So once you go into presentation mode, click on the button that says Present with Speaker Notes. And then one of the buttons on the speakers is Audience Tools. I don't know if I can share that right now. Let me try. Speaker Tools. There's an audience to ask questions, which is how I'm showing. I'll click hide. Know which ones I've answered. So this tool will be easy and available to us. Where do we find it in Google Slides? So I think that is the same question. So hopefully I've answered that. Let me go back to the slide. For others. So Seher. Rodney, can ask her question a little bit? Give me a little bit more information about what she's asking.
Hey Tim, the audio cut out there for just a moment. I didn't catch your question.
Oh, this participant, Seher Shah, has asked a question, but I don't know what they mean. Can you unmute them so they could ask their question?
Is it the one, did you get a count of the number of raised hands? Oh, can I link to it through Canvas? That's when you were showing the Google Q&A. Like all those questions came in right at the beginning when you first pulled up the Q&A.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hi. That was my question about the Q&A, if we can link it through Canvas and how many of these things, because instead of opening multiple windows and even asking students now go into this link and go into this link, I was just wondering how much of it can we integrate directly into Canvas so that if I just ask them, open up your Canvas homepage, these are the materials or these are the links you're going to use through the day or through the lesson?
Yeah, good question. So the Q&A tool through Google Slides is kind of an in-the-moment thing. You can only use it while you're in presentation mode. So it's not, I don't think it's something that you could just set up in advance and leave open over time. So if you were thinking of a strategy where you wanted students to be putting in questions throughout the week, which I think is an incredibly valuable strategy, this idea of, especially if you're using a flipped classroom approach where you're putting out your lectures in advance, you definitely want students to be asking those questions as they have them. You don't want to have to like wait until the end of the week to then come to class and then forget what their questions were. So having a Google Doc that you could link in Canvas, or using a discussion board. This is another thing that we've been playing with in the Sync workshop. If you're in the Sync workshop in Canvas, we have that community forum. And even in Canvas, you have the ability to sort responses by likes in a discussion board. So you could do the same thing that we're doing here, is you could have students ask, their question in a discussion board, and then, vote up and down questions that they want to see answered in class. So that would be another good strategy for that too. Question here was, do I get a counter of the number of hands raised? I didn't see a counter, but what I did see was lots of notifications. My entire screen filled up with notifications as you guys were raising your hands. And then in the participants panel, then I could see the people that had hands raised. So, and again, they were, but I don't think I saw like a summary count of how many hands were raised. In Zoom, the raise hand icon is separate from the thumbs up and clapping icons. Yeah. Yeah, so what you're talking about there are, what are those called? Responses? There was something else. I don't have them now because I'm a host, but you're right. In the tool, there's a thumbs up and there's a clapping hands that shows up on the screen kind of temporarily. And then the raised hand tool is in the participants panel. And that's a different tool. So you'll also notice that there are more things in the participants panel there that you can use. There's a yes, there's an up and a down, or a yes and a no. There's like a coffee break one, or go faster or go slower. So there are other tools that are built into Canvas that you might work into some kind of procedure for interacting with your students. Tom has a good question here. Feeling overwhelmed by the volume of online discussion boards and messages I've had to reply to. For larger classes, how can we ensure students don't feel overwhelmed by the volume of content they're asked to engage with, especially when using discussion boards? That's a really good question. For your larger classes, one strategy you might think about is to divide your discussions into smaller groups. So in Canvas, you can say this is a group discussion, and then you can go into the people tool and set up discussion groups. So maybe if you've got 200 people in your class, maybe making 10 discussion groups of 20 is going to be more manageable. And then what we also find there is that the students, because throughout the class, if they're discussing and having interactions with the same smaller set of people, they actually develop some relationships with those people. They get to know them a little bit differently. And so they leave kind of with the experience of a 20-person class, even though there was actually 200. And that makes it a little bit easier for you to then kind of hit each of those groups and give a little bit of response as well. Another strategy that I like in my classes is I encourage students in discussion boards to respond with first names. So if they're responding to Thomas, they'd say, Thomas, I like your idea of this. Have you thought about that? And that way, when Thomas goes into the discussion board, he can use the search feature in his browser. Like for me, it's Command F in Chrome to do a find, and then just do a search for your name, and then you can quickly jump to all the people that are talking to you. So that's one strategy that I've used for quickly combing through larger discussion boards and seeing who's talking to me. All right, another question from Cheryl here. All right, not another question, another question. That is from Cheryl. How will we use slides in synchronous classroom while viewing the remote students at the same time? Will there be multiple screens and lines to monitor and control? I can't speak to every classroom, but my assumption is that yes, there will probably be multiple screens. At the very minimum, you're going to have a computer and probably some kind of screen on the wall. So if you have your slides running on your computer and you have your remote students up on the wall, that would be one strategy. I like, if possible, to have a second screen, on the wall. If I were setting up rooms, I would get two screens there, so that I can see those students while also having content. So one screen for Zoom, one screen for content. If you have two screens available, that's a good use. We've got some people with their hands raised. Do you have questions? Let's see, let's go to Shahira.
Okay. So what was the question you asking, Tim?
Oh, you had your hand raised, so I assumed you had a question.
No, no, that was a while ago. Pardon me. Okay, thank you.
All right. If you don't have a question, go ahead and lower your hand, and I will respond to some of you that have your hands raised now. Margaret, did you have a question? You're muted, Margaret.
I clicked on
oh, there you go.
That I crossed with the hook. There we go. Can we have people, there's a couple questions, it seems. One is about, does everybody in the classroom, all the in-person students, are they also on Zoom? And then can we put groups of students together, breakout rooms, with students on the screen and students in the classroom, or do you have to be separate?
Yeah, so good question. The short answer to your question is yes. I think it will be the best experience for everybody if everybody is on the Zoom call, whether they're physically in class or not. And I know that there are issues about asking or requiring students to bring laptops, but at a very minimum, having some kind of tablet or using their phone to participate and even monitor the Zoom would allow you to break up students. I see another question here about, how we do group work when we have to keep 6 feet distances. And that is kind of relying on that idea that everyone will be able to interact digitally. So I would recommend, if it were my class, I would recommend to students that they do bring a device with them when they come to class. They'll have a better experience and they'll be able to interact with those students that are virtual. When you set up your breakout rooms, you can do that manually or automatically. In this group with 220 people, we just distributed it automatically. But if you want to kind of pair people, a physical person with a remote person, or kind of strategically do those breakout rooms, that's going to take more time and a little more work, but that could be a thing that is a thing that you could do.
Is there also a problem with feedback with multiple people on devices in the physical room?
I think for the most part, it's going to be an issue, but probably a small issue. Zoom does a pretty good job canceling echoes. But yeah, that is a thing because, right now we're all kind of reducing the echo by probably using some kind of headphones or something like that. But probably in your classroom, you're going to have speakers out in the room so that you can hear the remote. So, you're not going to go around class wearing headphones. So strategically doing some muting when students are asking questions will help them not hear themselves back through the call. But then again, I think Zoom is getting better and better about that. When I was teaching back in 2009 with Google Hangouts, that was an issue because we didn't have quite the technology we have now, but Zoom does a good job. When you're talking about breakout rooms, I think it would be pretty common for students to put in their headphones. So you're not, dealing with that kind of just ambient noise if you're talking about those students involved in the breakout rooms on their own devices.
And I can share a little bit about that, Tim. A couple of us were able to get into some rooms on Monday. We know everyone wants to be in their rooms. We all want to be in it too. We'd love to have some people in the room for this session. That would have been great, right? They are working very hard to get all those rooms set up. But a couple of the things is to deal with the feedback is because I was pretending I was being the student. I turned the volume all the way down, and that's one thing is if you're in the room, just have the volume turned down and only have them interacting through the chat or through, conversing with you. And the other thing that I tried out was having one headphone in as a student, and then you could hear both sessions. So those are a couple of strategies. As you get in the rooms and you get tips, share them out. Let us know what's working with your students.
Yeah, and Allison's advice there leads right into my last point, which is use your team. Ask yourself, who is your support team? And I would encourage you to set up an internal team of, between 3 and 5 of your peers to maybe get together and to have some kind of channel to share ideas as you find what works and what doesn't. Maybe get together on Zoom and practice sharing your screen, practice assigning breakout rooms, and practice these things kind of in a safe environment so that when you get to class, if you haven't taught, if you didn't teach, in spring, and if you haven't done some of these things in Zoom, so that you're not doing them for the first time in front of a class, practice these things. If you want to try using the Q&A tool, set up a Google Slides with some friends and practice. It's going to help. It's in my experience, you learn it really quick. It's just the anxiety of this is something I've never done before. That is the biggest thing. So once you've done it, once you've practiced it, and if you can do that in a safe place, then I think the anxiety will go down, and you'll be more excited about getting fall started this way. Know who your instructional designers are. Some of the units have instructional designers. Like I am an instructional designer for the Herberger Institute. So if you're in any of the colleges in the Herberger Institute, I'm your instructional designer. Reach out to me with pedagogical questions, course design questions, questions about what kind of assessments are going to work best, or how to structure a course that's going to make the most sense in this environment. Other units have instructional designers as well. And if your unit doesn't have specific instructional designers, then Rodney's team with UTO has a support group for you as well. And they're doing drop-in hours. I'm going to put the link to that right here. And so every day between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m., they've got instructional designers sitting in Zoom rooms just waiting for you to ask questions. So definitely make use of that. So think about your peers as setting up a support team. Think about what instructional designers you have in your unit, or what uses you can make of the UTO support system. Also, as Allison mentioned, if you haven't gotten into that Canvas course for the Sync workshop, do that too. You'll make some connections in there and find a lot more resources in there as well. And then the last thing is just be transparent with your students. We're all figuring this out together. As we talked about with right away earlier, give your students permission to say, hey, I can't hear you. You walked away from the microphone, or I think your mic's battery went dead, or give some permission to get some feedback from your students if you've walked out of frame, or if it's hard to see what you're writing on the board, or something like that. Because you don't want them to wait until the end and say, oh, your microphone went out after 5 minutes and we didn't hear anything. That's frustrating. So go ahead and elicit some of that feedback from your students, and also check with your units to see if there might be some instructional assistance or some technical assistance, or different units are calling this role a different thing, a TA, whatever, that might be able to help in that as well. And that'll vary from department to department or unit to unit. So check with your chair, your director, and see what they're doing about that as well. So don't try to approach this all by yourself, but know that they're set up a team and know that there are support systems in place for that. So in the chat, I'd like you to answer a couple questions for me in the last few minutes that we have here. Think about some ways of what you can do between now and fall to help you feel more ready. And I think practice is an excellent one, Andrea. And if anyone wants to practice with me, send me an email. I'll set up a Zoom call. We can practice. If you're not, familiarize yourself with the tools. If you haven't done any Canvas training, this is a good time to do that. As I said before, even though we're talking about in-person classes and synchronous experiences, the more you can offload to Canvas to take pressure off the synchronous experience, the better it's going to be. And I think you'll enjoy that as well. Set up a Slack group. I like that one. These are good suggestions. And then the other question to consider, just real quickly, what are the two main things that you'll take away from this session? Find a decent digital whiteboard. Yeah, there's lots of apps, lots of tools there that can do that. Same way you get to Carnegie Hall, right, Ted? From our music faculty there. Practice, practice, practice. Yeah, practicing drawing on a tablet. I saw that one slide by really quickly, but that's if you're going to use one of those touch screens, or you're going to use a whiteboarding app on your tablet, then practice with it. Yes, definitely don't stress yourself out. This is actually a lot more fun and a lot easier than anyone really understands yet. This is my favorite way to teach. I didn't say that very clearly at the beginning, but I loved teaching this way, and my students loved it. It's the most flexible on both sides, and it really is engaging because the whole time that you have with your students, you're doing stuff with your students, not just up there talking. So I really think that that you're going to have a great experience. I know it's a little bit scary to do it the first time, and there will be a learning curve with the technology for sure. But once we get through it, and I promise you that when we come out of COVID, that ASU is going to have the just top-notch instruction going on, that all these techniques that we're adapting and that we're learning to deal with the situation are just going to make the classroom experience better forever. So keep your chin up. You're doing good work. All right, and I'll close with a thank you. I don't know if Allison or Rodney have other messages for you, but thanks for attending the workshop, for asking your questions, voicing your concerns, and of course for prioritizing student learning. The fact that you're here during the summer and doing this shows that you care and shows that ASU is doing great things for their students. So thank you.